Hey Sub-Furies! Smaug is one of the most recognisable characters in all of fiction. He's definitely the most recognisable dragon. Now, I have a lot of gripes with the Hobbit movies. Believe me. But one I do not have is with the design of Smaug.
And do you now?
He had the presence, the scheming intellect, the lustful arrogance that I first read in the Hobbit novel when I was 7 years old. But today we'll be talking about how Tolkien designed Smaug, or how he designed his dragons more generally throughout his novels, which sources he drew from, because the story of it is actually pretty interesting. Most people will know that Tolkien was an avid reader and lover of mythology, notably Norse or Icelandic or other Scandinavian-esque stories, and we see that bleed into his novel, and Smaug is no exception. In Tom Shippey's book, J.R.R. Tolkien, author of the century, he wrote, "For Tolkien's taste, there were too few dragons in ancient literature. Indeed, by his count, only 3. The Midgardsum of Ragnarok, the dragon which Beowulf fights, and Fafnir, who was killed by the Norse hero Sigurd." Tolkien didn't feel that this first dragon, the Midgardsum, could fit into any real down-to-earth story, so he drew more from the dragon from Beowulf and from Fafnir. Now before I continue, I want to say, yes, my pronunciation will be entirely off. I do not know how to pronounce old Scandinavian names. Forgive me, I am only from little old Canada. The marks of the epic saga Beowulf are immediately apparent in the story of The Hobbit. In the story of Beowulf, a slave steals a jeweled goblet from a dragon's hoard, causing it to rage and destroy villages. It's written that, "There went inside a man, I know not which, and he groped near the heathen hoard, his hands wrapped around an ornamental bauble." Tolkien references this exact scene when Bilbo first disturbs Smaug. He grasped a great two-handled cup, as heavy as he could carry, and cast one fearful eye upwards. Smaug stirred a wing, opened a claw, the rumble of his snoring changed its note. And in the movie, we see a similar thing happen. But there's one other moment that Tolkien was inspired by in the Beowulf saga. The death of the dragon. Despite the saga setting up Beowulf as the main character with a drive to protect his people, it's not actually Beowulf that slays the dragon in the end. That honour goes to his friend, Wiglaf. In much the same fashion, Tolkien subverts our expectations by setting up Thorin as a main character with a drive to protect his people and kill Smaug, but it's Bard that delivers the killing blow. But believe it or not, Tolkien was actually kind of disappointed with the dragon in the Beowulf saga. He felt it was just too simple, that it represented greed and the corrupting evil of avarice, but really nothing more. He wrote in a letter to a fan that, "I find dragons a fascinating product of imagination, but I don't think that the Beowulf one is frightfully good. Fafnir in the late Norse versions of the Sigurd story is better, and Smaug and his conversation obviously is in debt there." While Tolkien clearly didn't intend for Smaug to have these attributes of avarice, arrogance, and ancient power, he wanted Smaug to have bestial life and thought of his own. So that's what we got, an intelligent and scheming dragon that could meet the characters on not just a physical level, but an intellectual one. But as Tolkien himself said, he also took inspiration from a dragon in Norse mythology called Fafnir. Much like Smaug, Fafnir was more intellectual, had his own desires and his own personality. Interestingly, when Fafnir is confronted by Sigurd, there is a short scene in the epic saga of the two playing riddles, as Fafnir tries to guess Sigurd's name. This is not unlike one of the very first scenes between Bilbo and Smaug. Bilbo cryptically explains to Smaug that,
Who are you? And where do you come from? May I ask?
I come from under the hill.
Underhill.
And under hills and over hills my path is led. And through the air, I am he who walks unseen.
Bilbo goes on to describe himself in weird and unusual ways. It's a great scene of the book, and it recalls that part of the epic saga. When considering how dragons should be depicted, Tolkien, at least in his mind, explained that, "I never imagined that the dragon was of the same order as the horse. And that was not solely because I saw horses daily, but even in the footprint of a dragon. The dragon had the trademark of fairy written upon him. In whatever world he had his being, it was an otherworld. To Tolkien, dragons epitomized the otherworldliness of fantasy. They had to be grand and majestic and almost like their being was beyond the reach of mortals in some fashion. And this really does tie in with Tolkien's depiction of dragons, not only in The Hobbit but throughout the Silmarillion. They're these otherworldly creatures with mysterious powers that we don't really understand that can affect the characters in unexpected ways. They're not merely beasts. Tolkien thought a lot about dragons in early literature. In a piece he wrote on Beowulf, he said, "A dragon is no idle fantasy. Whatever may be his origins in fact or invention, the dragon in legend is a potent creation of man's imagination, richer in significance than his barrow is in gold." Historically, they had been creatures that humanity had devised to embody any number of characteristics or attributes, particularly greed, hence the hoards of gold, or selfishness, or wickedness that men must overcome, either in themselves or in the world around them. And we see these ideas of Tolkien's being represented in Smaug as much as we do in his other dragons. We can juxtapose Smaug's greedy desire for gold and gems with Thorin's own lustful desire for the Arkenstone. It blinded them both, and in a sense, it led eventually to their downfall. Thorin's famous last words were, of course,
valued all above gold, this world would be a merry place.
And undoubtedly Smaug's arrogance that we see in Fafnir is well known and established. But that's all from me. My question for you today, Subfuries, is if you were part of a mythological pantheon, what would you be a god of? Mischief or oceans or cats? Let me know down in the comments below. In the meantime, I'd love for you to come join me on my second channel. It's a more vloggy channel where I talk about anything and everything. You can get to know me and I can get to know you. I'd love for you to join us. It's To the Future. There's a link to that down in the description or on my main channel. If you have the ability and you like what I make, I'd love for you to support me on Patreon for just a couple of dollars a month. It always helps. Otherwise, come follow me on Twitter, Wattpad, Facebook, email me stuff that you've made, or whatever, the drinks, at the address and links in the description below. Stay nerdy, Subfuries, and I'll see you in the future.